Hello, welcome to Fairytale Day. Today we're going to be reading Fairy Tales Told in the Bush by Sister Agnes. It was written in 1911, I believe. Yes. So the fairy tale we're going to be reading today is called The Underground Lake. Tom Jones went to stay with his uncle at Mount Gambier during the Christmas holidays. And, as he said when he wrote to his father, he was enjoying every minute of his visit to the land of lakes. The people who lived in and around the mount were arguing about the Blue Lake. Was it really part of an underground river, or was it just the crater of a worn-out volcano that had got filled up with water? They had argued about this for years, and Tom liked to listen to both sides, although he knew that all the arguing that would ever be done could never make him believe anything but the underground river. There was the beautiful blue water shut in by high banks, which made it look like a basin half full of water. The water was always fresh and sweet. No bottom could be found in the middle of the lake. There was always a strong current too. Oh, of course, it was one of the most wonderful underground rivers. One day, Tom went down to see the man in charge of the pumping station, with whom he was a great chum. They had been friends ever since Tom, soon after he came to the mount, had helped to clean the boat that was wanted in a hurry to take a visitor across the lake. There was only one boat kept, and it had to be as clean as man could make it before it could go on the Blue Lake, as the people of the town used it for water for drinking. Tom went very often to the Blue Lake. He meant to be an explorer when he grew up, and he was trying to fit himself for that work, because he believed that whatever you meant to be as a man, you should train yourself for a while still a boy. On this special day, he had been exploring the country as usual, and on his way home called in to see his friend, the man in charge. There were several men talking to his friend, and just as Tom drew near, he heard the old man say, "Well, I tell you what I know, not what I've heard. The Blue Lake is an underground river. When you hear my reason for saying that, you'll agree with me. Let me see. It was about 20 years ago, when instead of being a grey-headed old fellow as I am now, I was a black-headed young fellow, and I had the best pair of grey horses in the district. I didn't believe in the underground river theory then, but because I didn't know then what I did a little while after. One day I was driving my pair of greys along the edge of the Blue Lake when one of them slipped down the bank and fell into the water and sank. I soon got some men out to help me drag the lake, but no horse could we find. So I sadly set off for home with my one grey horse. I hadn't got very far along the bank towards McDonald's Bay when a friend of mine met me, leading my lost grey horse. "This is yours, is it not?" said my friend. It was mine. I knew it by my brand on him. Now, where do you think my friend found him? Why, in the water, on the other side of the hill that separates the Blue Lake from McDonald Bay. So I knew that if my horse got underground in that way from the Blue Lake to McDonald Bay, there must be a river flowing. When the old man finished telling his story, he went away chuckling to himself, and everyone laughed at his joke. That is, everyone but Tom, who went to his uncle's house slowly, thinking about the underground river. When Tom reached home, tea had long been over, and to explain why he was so late, he told them the story of the grey horse. Tom's uncle said he also thought the Blue Lake was part of an underground river, and Tom then determined to explore and find the hidden openings where the river entered and went out to the big basin. Next morning, Tom set to work at once to explore the Blue Lake. First he made a map of that part of the country, then he drew a straight line from McDonald Bay to the lake, and that marked it straight across the opposite end of the lake. This done, he made a second line of heavy rope with a heavy lead tied at the end and leaned over the edge of the bank. Many times he struck with his leaded line, but each time it hit against the bank. Tom sighed sadly, thinking that if only he lived in England instead of in Australia, there would come a little fairy, most likely the queen of the fairies herself, and she would take him down into the water and show him the hidden openings and other wonders. But Australia was a new country, and very few people believed there were fairies anywhere. Just as Tom had sadly given up all hope of fairy aid, he felt the line pulled gently, oh so gently at first, then harder and harder until he could scarcely hold it in his hands. I won't give up, thought Tom. The worst I can get is, if I fall in, is a wetting. I can easily swim out. He held on and was gradually drawn down deeper beneath the water. Deeper and deeper he went until he was jerked on one side and found himself on the bank of a fiercely rushing torrent. Tom's first thought was one of triumph. I knew it was an underground river, he cried aloud. Then he jumped as if a pistol had been shot when a voice near him said, "The least you might do is thank me for bringing you here." There stood a tiny gnome all dressed in green. I pulled the leaded line that you threw down into the water. And I must say, for a boy who has the sense to try and find the opening of the river, you know very little about your country. Australia, a new country indeed. It was thousands and thousands of years old before Britain was in existence. Oh, I know what I'm talking about, for I have lived underground for a good many 100 years. Tom was so thoroughly surprised that he stood quite still and stared at the little gnome, who continued, "No fairies either? Oh, indeed, I could tell a different story. No one to help poor little Australians. The helpers are right here, right enough, but most little Australians not only don't want the help of the gnomes and the fairies, but they don't believe there even are such beings. Why, even the one I have just helped has not a word of thanks for what I have done for him. Oh, I do thank you so much. How much I can't say. I wanted to prove that the Blue Lake is a river. Yes, I wanted to prove that more than anything else in the world. And I'm so glad you have let me come to see it. Please may I explore some more of the river?" Not only did the kind gnome allow Tom to see the wonders underground, but he offered to act as guide. As soon as Tom had eaten a bunch of wild cherries that the gnome gave him, he was not only dry and comfortable, but had become as small as the gnome and could understand the talk of bird, beast and fish. Tom was surprised at the great change and told the gnome he had often eaten enough wild cherries before and nothing strange had taken place. But the gnome explained that only cherries picked by a gnome and by him given to a human being had the power to change the one who ate them. "Now," said the gnome, "you will see the source of this underground river. I would take rather long to get there by walking, so we'll go on my airship." He gave a strange cry and at once was answered by a bird, which was something like an albatross. It flew across to the gnome. "Come," said the little fellow, at the same time jumping on the back of the big bird. Tom took his place next to his guide, and at the gnome's bidding, the bird flew and flew upstream. It was a delightful sensation of rushing and swooping, then rising again, making Tom just a little frightened at first. But the bird had such a broad back, with such a comfortable, hollow place for Tom to nestle into, that he soon enjoyed his sail through the air. "Don't bother to look at the places we passed, just get used to this way of travel, and on our return journey I shall point out things of interest." Tom obeyed, and by the time they reached the source of the river, he had become quite used to the rapid rush. Now the river came bubbling out of the hills far away in the north of South Australia, in a spring which flowed along a few miles and then seemed to trickle back into the earth. But instead of doing that, it trickled down into a cave, a big, wonderful cave, lighted up by thousands of strange, white, glistening things, some hanging from the roof, others standing upright on the floor. "Oh," cried Tom, clapping his hands joyously, "it's the fairies' palace, I just know it." The gnome told him it was only one of many, for Australia was just honeycombed with them. A few had been found by human beings, for instance, the Narracoorte Caves and the Buchan Caves, both of which were really far too near the surface of the earth for safety, that is, safety for the fairies. "There are no human beings living near this cave for miles and miles," said Tom's guide. "Indeed, we feel sure some of our caves will never be found, and this is one of them." "Why are there no fairies here now?" began Tom, but his question ended in a shriek. For first he felt some invisible hands pull his hair on one side and then the other, and then whilst someone else tickled his sides and tweaked his ears and nose. All done so gently that after the first shriek, Tom felt afraid of his fear, especially as he saw the gnome grinning at him in a friendly way. Tom entered into the joke too. "I know who you are, you need not hide. Please, oh please let me see you." "Shut your eyes," said a sweet voice. Tom obeyed. He felt something pass swiftly near his face, but he remained quite still with eyes closed. "Open!" cried the same voice. He had not to be told twice, and the sight that met his eyes kept him as still and silent as when he had been surprised at seeing the gnome. The place seemed to be just full of fairies, all dressed in green and gold, some sitting on the beautiful standing crystal, others floating in the air, others peeping from behind the hanging crystals, while in front of Tom stood the Queen, surrounded by her fairies in waiting. He knew she was the Queen by the crown on her head and the sceptre in her hand. "Do homage," whispered the gnome, so down on one knee went Tom and kissed the tiny hand held out by Her Majesty. "Oh, you are beautiful, beautiful," said Tom. "You are as beautiful as the golden wattle blossom on the golden trees." What a laugh ran through the crystal cave, a laugh like the tinkling of hundreds of tiny golden bells. Little boy, if you had the magic sight to look at the wattle trees, you would see that often when people think they are looking at wattle blossom, they are really looking at the fairies of the sunny south. Why does the wattle blossom die so soon? Said the Queen. Indeed, said Tom, I've often wondered why it lasts so short a time when it's picked. Because the fairies who play amongst it fly away from every branch the human breaks off the tree. I shan't pick any more, said Tom, but oh, I do hope I shall have the magic sight. Unless you give your power, you'll not be able to see us. But we know you too, and that you believe in love and fairies. So now you'll join in the game with my subjects. After that we must say goodbye, for I and my fairies have much work to do. Tom enjoyed the fairy game very much. The fairy, by a wave of her sceptre, gave him the power to float through the air, and the game was one of hide and seek amongst the crystals. All too soon for Tom, the fairies, in obedience to a word from Her Majesty, ceased their play and stood before her. She gave him commands. They said goodbye to Tom, and in a moment he and the gnome were alone once more. Don't look so sad, said the gnome, for I have good news for you. The Fairy Queen was so pleased with you today that she has consented to take you to see just where the waters enters and leaves the place known as the Blue Lake. When we get to the place where I pulled you into the water, I have permission to turn you into a fish. You may stay in the Blue Lake for the whole day, and as soon as you swim through the palace, the place where the river flows into the sea, you'll turn into a boy again. Tom thanked the gnome, you may be sure, and was eager to be off. So getting onto the big bird's back again, they flew quickly on their return journey. Arrived at the entrance of the lake, Tom was given to eat nothing more than a blade of grass picked from the bank of the river. He felt a shudder through him, and it seemed as if the water called and beckoned him. He could not keep back. Goodbye, kind little gnome, I must jump into the water. Thank you, thank you, thank you. He found himself floating through the water, murmuring, thank you, but already he was some distance across the lake. What fun it was floating without the least effort. He swam across to the landing stage where the caretaker kept the boats. He poked his head out to look at things. A fish! I'm positive I saw a fish, exclaimed a man who was standing on the steps talking to the caretaker. I'm positive you did not see a fish, sir, answered the other. I have lived here long enough, and at first I fished often enough, but I never saw a fish or felt a bite. Nothing lives in this water. Tom poked his nose up again, this time to see who was talking to the man in charge. It was such a surprise to see his uncle there that Tom gave a jump in the water. Both men were looking at the spot, and this time it was the man in charge who cried, a fish, I'm positive I saw a fish. Then he darted away to a place where he drew forth a rod, baited it, and jumped into his boat, and with Tom's uncle rowed to a spot where Tom had been just a few minutes before. Now for some fun, thought Tom. I will nibble the line some distance above the hook, and they will get wild after a time. And they did get wild after a time, after the line was dragged down, and yet the bait was never touched. But Tom grew quite careless. He nibbled nearer and nearer the hook, and at last he was caught. How it happened he did not know, but he was firmly hooked. It hurt his lip when he tried to back away. So he at last allowed the man to pull him up into the boat. If there is one fish, there must be more, cried his uncle. Unhook him and bait him again. It hurt Tom worse when the hook was dragged out of his lip. But what his uncle said hurt the worst. It was, I'll put the poor thing out of its misery. Give me your pocket knife. He held Tom the fish in his left hand, took the knife, and was just going to stab when Tom cried out, Uncle, don't, you know me. Both men stopped what they were doing to look at the fish. It spoke, said Tom's uncle. In his surprise, he did not hold the poor fish so tightly. Tom gave a flap and a jump, and as he reached the water, he cried out, Hurrah, hurrah! No more fishing for me, said Tom's uncle. Not for me, said the man in charge, and they rowed quickly to land. Tom lost no time in getting right away from the place where he'd nearly met his death. And we have a lovely picture there of the uncle fishing and Tom getting back into the water. I won't be inquisitive again as long as I'm a fish, he said, and swam straight for the place he had marked as the part where the river ran out from the lake to join the sea. Ugh, as he floated through the big opening into the underground river, he seemed to be able to feel the darkness because it was so black. But after a little while, his eyes got used to it, and presently he saw on either side of the river many beautiful crystals which glowed softly. He knew he was now passing through another cave, and he wondered if any fairies were watching him. The river wound round again, and lo, there was still another cave, shining brightly on all sides, for its wall and roof and floor were covered with fungi. "Some of us are here," cried a sweet voice, "and you shall have a glimpse of us at our work." At the same instant he saw fairies in all directions, all hard at work, making the fungi grow brighter and brighter. "Tell me what you're doing," said Tom. "How do you make it glow like that?" "The fairy's secret, little man. Goodbye." "Goodbye," answered Tom. Thank you for the glimpse." He had scarcely finished speaking when he felt himself being borne along at an awful pace, and the water was rushing to meet the sea. They met, and Tom felt himself hurled down ever so far below the surface of the water, then tossed up again. He had gone down as a fish, but he came up as a boy, and his wet clothes kept him from swimming very easily. Just as he thought he would not have strength to swim much further, he heard a voice say, "There's a boy sinking. Pull over and take him into the boat." In a few minutes he was safe among a boatload of picnickers who had driven down from the mount to Dingley Dell, the beautiful place where Adam Lindsay Gordon lived for many years. "Why, it's young Tom Jones," cried one of the rowers. "Did you walk all the way here from your uncle's place? It's good 19 miles. "No," answered Tom, "I swam from the Blue Lake," but no one would listen to his tale of adventure. They hurried him to Adam Lindsay Gordon's cottage, wrapped him in shawls, and soon drove away with him to a doctor because they said he was raving. In vain Tom pointed to the nasty jagged cut in his lip and told them he had been a fish for a time. They would not listen, and even to this day, as he begins to tell his wondrous adventures, they smile so broadly that Tom gives up the attempt to make them know the truth about the river theory. Tom knows what he knows, however, and he is certain he has not seen the last of the fairies, but that in the wattle blossom season they will allow him to see them among the golden blossoms on the riverbank. The end.